All right. Good evening, everybody. For the record, it is 5:15 on Thursday, February 18th. This is a City of Wenatchee work session. Just remember, council members, that these are being recorded and people are watching at home. So I know prior to COVID, when we had these work sessions, they weren't quite as public. So this and the others will be that way. So we've got two things on our agenda tonight, and the first is hearing from Stephen Noonschwander regarding the Shoreline Master Plan update. And then secondly, and we'll probably take a little bit more time with this, is House Bill 1590 for homeless funds regarding the 0.1% councilmatic sales tax. So Stephen, let's start with you with Shoreline Master Plan.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, good evening. Good to be here. We have been working over the last year or so with Anchor QEA on updating our Shoreline Master Program. This is a periodic update, is what it's called. It's required of all of us every 8 years to review and update our Shoreline Master Program. So just, I know some council members are new since the last time we updated, so I'll just go just a real quick overview of Shoreline Management Act. Was put in place to prevent harm caused by uncoordinated and piecemeal development on the state's shorelines. With that came a guidance document in the administrative code, and then each jurisdiction is required to adopt locally a master program that controls development within 200 feet of the shoreline. And this is a document that is approved by the Department of Ecology. So unlike a comprehensive plan or our zoning code where we adopt locally and then enact them, with the Shoreline Master Program, we go through that process, and actually the Department of Ecology has, over the last couple of years, started a joint review, which we're doing with them, where we have a joint comment period. We've involved them from the very beginning. But they have an administrator, a role in this update where we'll update our code, our plan. They will provide a letter of consistency. We'll adopt it locally, and then the Department of Ecology will also adopt that or accept that document. So some key principles of the Shoreline Master Program and the Shoreline Management Act is balancing environmental protection, public access to the state's shorelines, and water-oriented uses, or uses that are necessary to be sited along these bodies of water.
Can you help me with that top picture?
Osprey?
Osprey.
Oh, it's on a thing. I just
it's on
I see like a floating
platform.
thing. Okay, got it. Okay.
A series of Osprey on the platform.
I thought it was a windy day and something was blowing. Okay, got it. I see the platform now.
Just a.
I need your glasses, huh?
I do.
So the Shoreline Jurisdiction. So this master program takes effect within the first 200 feet of the shoreline or the associated floodplain. And so this graphic just shows it's a very narrow band that this Shoreline Master Program applies. Just an overview of the city. We have not a lot of shoreline. Obviously, we front the Columbia River and the Wenatchee River. But we have the vast majority of our ownership is public. It's either city-owned or the Public Utility District owns it. And the result of that, I did a little research over the last 6 years or so since we last updated our Shoreline Master Program. We have accepted or reviewed 9 shoreline permits. 7 of those have been the Public Utility District. 1 has been our own, a city project, and the other was over the walkway at Pybus that never happened. So what that tells me is we don't have a lot of activity on our shoreline. We've had 5 shoreline exemptions, which are a lesser permit that we handle administratively. And again, the vast majority of those are the Public Utility District doing some work in their parks, reconfiguring some shorelines, doing some mitigation. And so we don't have a whole lot happening. Within a Shoreline Master Program, just like a comprehensive plan, there are goals, there are policies, We identify environments, so urban environments, conservation environments, and those are those environment designations. And then we generate use-specific standards for those different shoreline environments. Again, key topics of our master program are protecting private property rights. We have very few private property owners, mostly public, but also our protection of the environment, managing the vegetation along the shoreline, identifying buffers when development does occur, and also putting a high emphasis on public access to the water. So with our current process, so again, our last update was 2014, and since that time, the state has updated a number of its rules and regulations. And so what we get from the Department of Ecology is a document. It's called a periodic review checklist. This is a great document that they put together that says, okay, since the last mandated update timeframe, here are all the changes in the rules and regulations. And then we can use that as a basis of our update and can identify, yep, here's the change that was made by the state. Does it apply or does it not apply to the city of Wenatchee? And if it does, here's our change. And it's something that we work on with the Department of Ecology. They have a copy of our draft, and it really helps the process move along quite quickly. So we've been working with Anchor QEA on that checklist, on the update. We are, again, like I mentioned earlier, we're doing a joint review process with the Department of Ecology. So this is a new change that they did a couple of years ago, and the way it used to work is locally you would run through a process, you would have your planning commission hearing, your city council hearing, and then you would take your locally adopted document and you would then give it to the Department of Ecology. And then they would start a whole new process that had their own time frame, a hearing, and it became very long, it was very extended, it became just really a cumbersome process. And so they've changed that. And so now what we do is we begin our process early with the Department of Ecology. We engage them in these conversations. And then here in about 2 weeks, we're going to start a joint comment period with the Department of Ecology. And so then we're going to hold a public hearing with our planning commission. The state will be involved in that. That will be their component of this. And then we'll pass that document on to you. And so it becomes a really nice process for us to work through. We started this off in 2020. So in the middle of COVID, obviously, we did a virtual open house. We had pretty good attendance. A lot of state agencies, a few private property owners, local citizens joined our open house, did an overview of what we were looking at, what the requirements were. And that was a great opportunity to start our dialogue, particularly with the Public Utility District. Like I mentioned earlier, they're the primary user of our Shoreline Master Program. So we really wanted to engage them and make sure that what they needed was in our master program, that it was meeting their needs as they implement their licenses on the river. And so we've had some good conversations, and they have made some suggestions to update our master program, particularly as it relates to their utility work, with their existing utility lines and poles and infrastructure in the shoreline, and giving them just a little bit more latitude to be able to do that work without always having to get a new shoreline permit. So if they're replacing a pole with a new pole, that wouldn't require a shoreline permit from them. They could do that as a maintenance exemption, which I think is a really good addition. Long story short, we have until June 30th of this year to update our Shoreline Master Program. We're, again, like I said, we're about ready to start our comment period with the Department of Ecology. We have our Planning Commission hearing scheduled in March, and our plan is to be back before you with the public hearing for the council in May, which will give us about a month of wiggle room. This is a really confusing graphic with lots of lines, essentially saying what you have to do, when you have to do it. And as I've explained, we've started our periodic update. We've evaluated our plan. We've made corrections as needed. And so now we're in these last two boxes, legislative action, moving towards that. Here's our timeline moving forward. So we are about halfway down. Public notices issued, SEPA submitted to the Department of Ecology in our 30-day comment period. We're getting ready to start that and moving through the rest of the process. So what have we done? Like I said, we've been using the periodic checklist from the Department of Ecology, and so as they have updated definitions, a series of exemptions for boat yards and a couple of other things that really don't apply to us. Those have been included. We've been using Department of Ecology, their guidebooks. We have looked at the master program and updated a few things here and there. And then we've solicited public comments and comments from the Chelan PUD. We've worked with state parks. They've looked at the document. Department of Fish and Wildlife has looked at it already. So we've tried to engage the real key players early on so that we can make sure that we get their comments in the record. I'm happy to report that there are very few changes to our Shoreline Master Program. And those changes, again, are really initiated by state law changes, guidance document updates from the Department of Ecology. There's been some consistency updates. So in 2014, we were the Department of Community and Economic Development. That was in the master program. That has since changed. So obviously they've gone through and updated the name of the department. That's one of the small things that has happened with our master program. It's very minor. I think number 4 is an important one. They've added an exemption for the normal maintenance for the utilities. That's what I mentioned earlier. That was in response to the public utility district. Regularly, the Office of Financial Management puts out new thresholds for when a shoreline permit is required. It's a monetary value of the permit, and when a permit is required for, or the monetary value for a dock when it's being replaced. Since we don't have any private docks, or I don't think we have any private docks, much of this is just really not important. We update our numbers, but we really don't use them very often just because of the type of shoreline that we have. So again, next steps, I feel like I'm repeating myself. Our comment period is beginning. We'll have our hearing with the Planning Commission. Department of Ecology will issue their determination of consistency, which means it complies or it's consistent with the Shoreline Management Act. And then again, we'll be coming back to you in May for a hearing. And once we have that, we package everything up and we send it off to the Department of Ecology, and that should be it. Be happy to answer any questions.
Concerns that are being raised, anything
None.
that we should be worried about?
No, like I said, we had our open house and we've engaged the key players in the Public Utility District and state parks and Department of Fish and Wildlife, and no comments really, substantive comments from them, good additions. Everything else has just been very, we'll just call it a programmatic update, making sure that we comply with the current laws.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of residential or commercial stuff right on the water.
No,
much. We just don't.
No, we do. We have, so on the Wenatchee, a few property owners on the bluff above the railroad tracks. Yeah. It will get onto those properties, but again, they're so far from the water, just nothing really applies. And so, yeah, our shoreline permitting has all been through the utility district and the city and the DOT.
Great. Any questions for Stephen?
Yeah, just a couple of real quick things. One is, so do I understand it correctly that, if the PUD wants to put in a new power, not replacing an existing, but puts in a new power pole, they apply through us to do that
Correct.
rather than through Ecology directly?
That's correct. So
Okay.
we locally administer these regulations. And so, yes, if the PUD wants to put in a new power pole that didn't exist before, we would work with them on a shoreline permit
Okay,
for that. And basically what it is, they have biologists on staff. They would provide to the city a report that says we're going to, we want to put this infrastructure here. We're going to occupy this amount of square footage. We're taking out this kind of vegetation. We're going to replace that in this location. So that the key tenet of the Shoreline Management Act and our master program is a no net loss
right.
standard. So if you impact, then you mitigate so that across the board you don't have a loss of environmental functions.
Yeah, good. Second thing, you mentioned doing this joint process with the Ecology rather than, so is this the first time now that we've gone through that in that joint thing?
Yes.
Has that made a significant difference in timelines and those kinds of things?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah, it really does. Like I said, previously we would have had to have adopted locally about now,
Uh-huh.
and then give it to Ecology, and then they would have their couple
they
month
start over.
process.
Yeah. Yeah.
So essentially what it does is it reduces the amount of back and forth between us and Ecology. They're able to come into our process, and so we do things at the same time.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a great process, really.
Good. Mark been on longer than I have, but it seemed like we were always dealing with this. They're 6 years apart, but it seemed like you got done with it and then you started again to get ready for the next time, and it seemed like a perpetual process. So maybe we'll get a year or two off this way.
We will have a good hiatus, I believe, after this periodic update. Again, we see so few permits on our shoreline that it's
Good.
it's a good document.
Good. Thank you.
Any other questions for Stephen? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. House Bill 1590. So who's coming up? Sandra, Glenn, Steve, everybody, Linda?
The mob.
And I think you all got a white paper maybe last week on this. Okay.
Coming up?
I'll take the back seat. You guys drive.
Sandra's driving this ship. Well, the purpose tonight of this work session or this presentation is to give you some information on our work as a low barrier subcommittee. This committee was made up of myself, Sandra, of course, Glenn, Chief Crown, Laura Merrill, and Lori Barnett, who is the Director of Community Development for East Wenatchee. And I just want to reinforce that they have been very supportive and very involved in this process, and Mayor Crawford is also very supportive of it as well. Our goal is to educate you on the growing demands that the chronically homeless are placing on this community, and it's not getting any better. We want to give you some solid solutions and a potential source for funding. And while the current programs and assistance are helping decrease homelessness overall, it is not decreasing the chronically homeless, and that is increasing drastically. Currently, there are no low barrier shelters in Chelan and Douglas County, and the current shelters will not admit them simply because they are drug and alcohol addicted, and they're faith-based organizations, and they will not give them shelter. I'll just say this, the county commissioners for Chelan and Douglas County have not given us any support on this. They have not even taken a look at 1590, and nor do they intend to. And most of all, We talked about the current shelters in place, but most of the chronically homeless population suffer from mental health issues as well as drug and alcohol addiction. And as you will see by the information that we will present, we have a serious problem and it will only get worse. We are not going to be able to walk away from this, and we need to do something. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sandra.
All right. Well, we wanted to kind of start off with kind of giving you a sense of the scope of the problem and some of the impacts. And so on any given night in Chelan and Douglas County, there's on average about 350 unsheltered and chronically homeless people out on the streets. And actually, I should clarify that homeless people, about 84 are classified as unsheltered, and 266 on average are classified as shelters. So those are the folks you'd see in emergency shelters, transitional housing. It's not permanent housing, but they're at least safer. It's that group of 84, 85 that we hover around that you see out on the streets. And out of that, about half of them, about 43, are chronically homeless. And those are really the group that are the most vulnerable. They have disabilities, mental health issues, and have lived extended periods on the street. And definitely the most visible in the community. And as Councilmember Harold mentioned, we don't really have low barrier services available for this group. There are some emergency shelters, but they're higher barriers. And I guess I should clarify what low barrier means. Low barrier, if a shelter is structured that way, it's not an open free-for-all. There are rules, but they're minimal. They're based on client and staff health and safety. And it just minimizes, unnecessary rules that keep people out of services. So we have some shelters that are trying to move that direction, but we don't really have true low barrier shelter services. And as a result, there's a lot of people that end up sleeping outside and camping. Due to some recent court rulings, and Martin versus the City of Boise is the most well known, law enforcement and local governments really have limited options now for regulating where people camp or if there's public nuisances, unless there's a viable low barrier option available. And so basically the ruling deems it unconstitutional to enforce ordinances unless there is that alternative. And so because of that, law enforcement governments have their hands tied somewhat, and it has a lot of different impacts. So we wanted to kind of share some of the bigger impacts. And we feel that having a low barrier shelter would really, across the board in the community, provide a lot of positive impacts. So one is compliance with Martin versus the City of Boise ruling. If we have a shelter, we meet those requirements, and it opens up those options for law enforcement. And I don't know, Chief Crown, is there anything you want to add on that?
No, I think that also another ruling that is pertinent here in Washington State is Long versus the City of Seattle. And that gets to your RVs that are parked around town. They fit into possibly the upper category where the larger 350, that is not considered permanent housing by any means, but it certainly ties our hands when it comes to being able to find additional resources for those folks and hopefully get them off the streets, get them into a better situation. So really what the low barrier shelter does for us in law enforcement is adds a tool to our toolbox. A lot of times we are absolutely hesitant as a police department in using the criminal justice to deal with homelessness. It's highly expensive, it's not efficient, and it's literally slapping a Band-Aid on the problem. So we feel really strong that those sleep centers are possibly the best possible solution for that short period of time where we're trying to get some folks into additional programs, get some case management, and get them to the next level, which they're stable enough to actually be in our housing areas around the city. One of the places that we have here locally that is being used right now is St. Jude's Landing. Again, that's a location where, yes, they have very nice apartments, but without stabilizing them to the point where there's some case management, it's hard to keep them in that place. It really is, because they start becoming problems for some of the other tenants there that are really trying their level best to solve their addiction problems or anything else that they might have on the behavioral side. So we're very supportive from a law enforcement perspective for these low barrier shelters.
You know, another huge positive is improved health and well-being for the actual homeless individual. There's a lot of research that has been done that shows that there's a real strong link between housing stability and whole health. And really, you know, if someone is struggling every night to they don't know where they're going to sleep, it's really hard for people to look after their health and treat their addiction. So that really improves with stable housing. Also increased physical safety for the individual. For those people living on the streets, it's dangerous. And exposure to the severe weather, whether it's cold weather, hot weather, smoky weather, can really be dangerous for people. And we don't have hard stats on people here in the region dying because of exposure in the winter, but you know, many seasons you hear stories about people being found outside with hypothermia. And then street violence. Unsheltered homeless people are often the victims of crime, not the perpetrator. And it can be very dangerous. So safe shelter can have a lot of individual benefits. And during these times with COVID, you know, having shelter helps curb the spread. And especially, we'll talk about the sleep centers, but we're recommending individual units, and that really helps with transmission. The other big community impact is it really can help the hospitals and emergency rooms and clinics with some of their unreimbursable healthcare costs that they're seeing. Confluence Health has done some data work, and it's really kind of eye-opening. They estimate that on average they're losing, you know, about $1.2 million a year in unreimbursable costs, because for the chronically homeless, they're sick a lot more, and they tend to use the emergency room as their main care source. And so they refer to people as frequent flyers because they're there so often. And so it can have a big fiscal impact. And I think Chief Crown talked to some of the compliance issues with Boise and Martin, but also just in general, that drain on law enforcement capacity. And both East Wenatchee and the Wenatchee Police Department shared some of their logs of calls. And so you can see that, you know, it's pretty high. East Wenatchee logged 504 contacts with homeless individuals over a 2-year period, and 109 arrests, and Wenatchee PD about 800 and some. So that's a lot of resources going to respond to these folks. There's just a lot of fiscal and economic impacts to local governments and to businesses too. You know, responding to cleanup for local business owners that have people camping out in their doorways. It can impede customer traffic. Also, just in terms of government cleanup of public parks that are vandalized, you know, garbage left. Dave Erickson with our Parks Department estimated that they spent about $280,000 in 2020 cleaning up parks with vandalism. And he provided these pictures that I think are pretty telling. That's just one area that his folks had to go out and clean up. And then another positive impact is just reduced environmental hazards, especially along the river. There's a lot of encampments. And, you know, people that have, you know, human waste dumping into the rivers, used sharp needles, just lots of garbage. It can just be a hazard. Douglas County, their solid waste department over the summer sponsored an encampment cleanup. And these are pictures that they provided. And this is just one snapshot. They have got 100 pictures like this all over. But they ended up cleaning close to 100 camps. And you can see the stats there, 31,000 pounds of garbage. And our city environmental services too, they have to respond for dilapidated RVs that are leaking sewage. There's been a lot of that the last year in particular that just flows right into the streets, into the drains, into the waterways. So a lot of impacts there. So, and any questions on?
Keep going and we'll get to the end and we'll start grilling you.
Okay. Okay, so the group that Councilmember Harold referenced is recommending a couple things along with the homeless task force. We really feel for all of the reasons we just talked about, it's really critical that there are low barrier shelter services here in the region. And our group and the task force has researched some best practices, and there's different options out there. So we want to share that with you tonight, what we think a viable option is. But a big piece of it is the funding. Our current funding sources just won't support it. And the House Bill 1590 really, we feel, is a critical piece of that. So what we're recommending is that the cities of Wenatchee and East Wenatchee both enact 1590 and address the low barrier issue in two phases. One is the development of a new low barrier shelter that would be structured as a sleep center. And then the second phase of that is really expanding existing homeless services to serve those homeless clients. Like Chief Crown said, that's really the key, is once you get people shelter, connecting them with those services. And just a little bit of background on the 1590 funding. In June 2020, the House Bill 1590 was enacted, allowing cities and counties the ability to implement a sales and use tax. And it's targeted for affordable housing and housing services. And that can be through councilmanic authority. And the counties did have the first option. There was a deadline in the legislation of September of 2022, and that deadline passed. So the counties opted not to enact it. So at that point, cities do have the option. And the projected annual revenue, and we think this is probably conservative, is Wenatchee would be about 800 to 900,000, and East Wenatchee approximately 400,000. So it could go a huge way to filling that gap for homeless services and low barrier. And just to kind of be clear on what the funding can be used for, it can be used for the construction and operation of affordable housing, facilities where housing-related programs are provided, and mental and behavioral health-related facilities. But the other piece of it is it's got to target the eligible population that's listed there. So there's an income limit, and then the clients have to be part of the groups listed here. And it specifies homeless families. It doesn't specify individuals, but if you look at the other items listed there for eligibility, unsheltered and chronically homeless people almost always hit those categories. So we mentioned a sleep center model, and we have, I'm going to jump ahead and give you a visual here. So what we're talking about is individual units that people can stay in. So this is a Walla sleep center, and we'll share some pictures as we go along. But it's basically individual units. They tend to be 6 to 10 to 10 to 10 square feet, so 100 square feet. They're weatherproof to withstand the wind, the rain, and the snow. They're heavily insulated. Some sites do heat them, but a lot of sites don't. And they're designed that on average, the inside of these huts are 20 to 30 degrees warmer than the outside. So even though that sounds like in the winter, like people would freeze, they really don't if they're built correctly. Along with that, these sleep centers on site have office buildings, restroom facilities, and the office buildings are the key. And usually it's just a modular portable building, but it's a place for those staffing services to connect with people. So that's really key. The other thing that programs can do is really leverage local resources, hospitals, behavioral health resources for leverage staffing and having staffing partnerships where those professionals can come on site. So, for example, Columbia Valley Community Health indicated that they might be willing to partner and provide one of their medical mobile buses. So that's one example. Behavioral health, mental health crisis. I mean, there's a lot of community options out there that we could bring to the site. The other thing that the projects that we researched were strong on was security, just having that basic security. So overnight security guards are key, fence sites, that kind of thing. And we had reached out to Moses Lake and Walla Walla, and they both really gave the same advice about location. They said that that's absolutely critical, finding the right location, close to public transportation services, but not in residential areas, near schools, near the downtown core. So that's a really challenging part of it, trying to find the right site. In general, these programs have site security from like 7 at night to 7 in the morning, and they tend at a minimum to staff and have housing stability managers and case managers in the afternoon. Then the security guard comes on shift, and then in the morning, case managers come back as clients exit. And the other thing they said was just to, have that neighborhood outreach, make sure that the site blends into the neighborhood so there's nothing really jarring about it. So this was the Walla Walla Sleep Center, and our group hasn't actually been to Walla Walla yet, but they did a virtual presentation for us. They've been doing this for 4 or 5 years, I think, and so they spent, quite a bit of time sharing information with us. They went with sort of a Quonset hut, but it's an individual hut. They have moved a couple times, and they've learned a lot of lessons, and they've been really generous kind of sharing their experiences. They're on a permanent site now, and they have, I believe, 50 huts. And they are really tying in those on-site services. And I don't know if anybody has anything to add on the Walla Walla presentation. Okay, Moses Lake. The city of Moses Lake opened their shelter in, I want to say November, early December. And a small group of us actually went on a site visit in early January, and that included Mayor Kuntz and Councilmember Harold, Laura Merrill, Chief Crown, and Glenn and I. It was impressive. They really put this together in short order. I think they did it in 4 or 5 months. They have, I believe, 40 sites or 40 units on site. And you can kind of get a sense, their units look a little different, but it's the same idea. They went with a local kit that they could build, and they have 2 modular buildings. So they have one for their office staff and then one for restroom facilities. You can kind of see the inside. This one's a little more stark. There's not windows. They just have a cot in there. So they opted to go that route.
And the building in the bottom is the bathroom, I think, isn't it?
No, that's the
That's
office.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have a picture of the shower facility there.
Yeah, it's about the same size, and they've actually leased those buildings, so.
So when we were there, one of the things that Chief Kerr mentioned was the biggest calling card for this facility is the showers. When you're down and out and you want to warm up and get clean, that's a huge thing, is to make sure that you have those type of facilities on the grounds there. That alone is one of the biggest things. The office is structured in such a way that somebody can get work done while also keeping a very good eye on what's happening on the grounds. They don't have armed security there. It's actually a volunteer organization that runs the facility, and their security is more of just staffing with 911 plugged into their phone. And
the other company we wanted to share with you, and we haven't done any site visits where these units are being used, but it's a company that's getting a lot of positive reviews, and they're out of Everett. And they have units, and I'll jump ahead and kind of show you here, that kind of a little different model, but, you know, a few more windows, a little more, you know, build out inside. But what's interesting about this one is they say that this can be assembled in an hour. So they're a little more expensive, but you save in terms of construction and that kind of thing. They come on pallets, they're movable, they're portable long-term. And we're sharing two sizes here. One's a 64 square foot shelter, and it can accommodate 2 beds. The other is a 100 square foot shelter, which is definitely roomier, much better for couples. But we're going to share some of our recommendations for capacity. But long-term, as an emergency overflow, our recommendation is something a little larger where if you had to, you could get 2 people in there safely, socially distanced, you know, in a little breathing room. But that's an example of an option of what something could look like.
And these show heat and fans. Even Laurel Turner spoke to this issue, and she thought that it probably wouldn't be a good idea to put in the heat and the air conditioning. That at a certain point, if it gets so comfortable, you know, then it becomes less of an interest in being temporary. And yes, you want folks out of crisis, you want them safe, you want to stabilize them, but you also want to have incentive to move into another tier, to start addressing the services and get into a better housing situation. Having them be more simple is actually can be beneficial in this case. So you can get them without those components. It's also cheaper.
Yeah, like I mentioned, the group did research in terms of different approaches and different models. And so really looked at 3, one being the sleep center, but we also looked at more extensive long-term permanent facilities that would be operated 24/7, that would be facility-based. And then we looked at sort of an in-between option of having a permanent full-service shelter, but operating it only in the evening. And, you know, we looked at the costs first off, and the permanent facilities are really very expensive to staff. If you were going to staff this adequately to give those wraparound services and do it 24/7, you would be looking at anywhere between $800 to $1.2 million a year if you were really going to do it completely and fully. And the in-between approach wasn't that much cheaper. So the sleep center, like I said, we started looking at this. The costs were much more manageable, and the feedback we got was they were very effective as well. So, and one thing, you know, this model's fairly new, so there's not a lot of hard data in terms of the effectiveness of it in terms of client exits. But Seattle has a Georgetown Village, and they're showing performance of 38% on average of their clients exiting to permanent housing, compared to like 6% in local shelters, traditional shelters. So that's quite a difference. So that's kind of what we're recommending for phase 1. Phase 2 would be tying in those wraparound services to really get people tied in to services to help them move to permanent housing. So we included some examples of what that could look like. A big one could be increasing the number of permanent supportive housing units. PSH is long-term housing, basically. Parkside is a good example of that, where people have a unit or an apartment, they can live there forever if they wanted to, but they have on-site case managers, and it's really for people that have more extensive needs. So definitely our target population. The funding could also be used for expanding behavioral health services on site, expanding existing homeless day services. If we have a sleep center and it's only opened in the evening, people are still at odds during the day, and we have a lot of folks that don't have anywhere to go during the day. And so, you know, having day services where people can go and get those connections could really be key. And that also helps with compliance with the Martin versus Boise ruling, because if somebody is camping during the day and there's not an alternative for them, law enforcement has limited options. Another example could be really expanding homeless outreach. We have some strong homeless outreach specialists in the area, but really strengthening that capacity and also strengthening the partnership that outreach has with law enforcement. And another idea that came up was, looking at pursuing options for, like, say, an RV buyback program. There are so many RVs that are dilapidated, people are living in them, but they shouldn't be, they're not habitable. So, having some options where people can be incentivized to give those up and get into services.
Be a separate route for direct access to housing vouchers for people in the RVs if they, forego with their RV, something of that nature. We'd have to, look into models, but exploring those types of options.
So we wanted to share our target population and our recommended capacity, and especially the capacity that would meet the requirements of Boise. And so basically with our average population of 85 unsheltered, and that holds pretty firm in the area, we, with the sleep center and using other resources, could meet that requirement. And so we kind of laid out some options here that would meet that capacity requirement. So what we're proposing is the sleep center be outfitted initially with 40 units, individual units. Ideally, they would be one-person units, but they could have overflow capacity if needed to accommodate two. So that could be up to 80 beds. The Women's Resource Center this summer is opening a 20-unit expansion to their Parkside. So that's going to be 20 more permanent supportive housing units that could target this population. The Gospel House Emergency Shelter, that's an existing shelter that in the past has been pretty high barrier. They made a commitment recently to shift towards low barrier. So, and we feel they are making that move. I wouldn't say they're totally low barrier. So it may not be a perfect option for some of the most chronically homeless, but I think they're making that commitment to move that direction. So potentially 60 beds there. So by using the sleep center and other resources, we could have 120 beds plus an additional 40 for overflow. So that should more than enough meet the requirements of Boise Cascade, and I think just provides such a range of services for this group. And I know this is a lot of detail here, but we just wanted to kind of give you a sense of our budget projections. So on the left-hand side is the capital and one-time setup. And this is hard to project because we haven't identified a site. So some of these estimates would be dependent on what needed to be done on a piece of land. But I mean, it would include land acquisition and getting the site set up and graded and infrastructure and all that, and then buying the units. And then estimated annual operating expenses. So once the site was set up, and 1590 funds could support that, it could also support the operation, which we're estimating would be, close to $400,000 a year. And the challenge is with our current grant funding, we have really limited options for capital, first off. And, our funding is really stretched thin. So to support this, we'd have to take funding away from a lot of other programs with our current funding levels.
Other programs are being successful at lowering homeless population. Our chronic population is increasing.
Yeah. So, what we're recommending is a multi-funding approach, with 1590 being a big piece of that, and having East Wenatchee also combine their 1590 funding. And we provided in the supplemental paper that we provided a lot more detail on that. And this is just an example of how it could work with the different funding sources. We currently have a low barrier shelter grant. That's a one-time grant that allows for some capital we have some other grants that we could kind of piece together. So there are options to get it up and running and then long-term. But sort of the common theme here is if 1590 funding isn't injected into the mix, we really wouldn't be able to make it work. And so what we're recommending is that the City Council consider convening a public hearing to take testimony and deliberate and take action on the potential option of enacting the 1590 to support the Phase 1 and Phase 2 strategies that we're recommending.
So, as Sandra has presented, and Chief Crown and Glenn, we have approximately 80 chronically homeless, and we know that they are the most vulnerable segment due to substance abuse and mental illness. We also know that current shelters do not provide the services that they need for this segment of the homeless population. And they are a continual drain on our city budget due to the damage to city parks and local businesses. As Sandra said, our Parks Department estimated costs of about $280,000 in 2020 for cleanup in our parks because of homeless. It provides a safety issue for our children that are trying to experience those parks. They may step on a needle or garbage everywhere, health issues. And most important, our local law enforcement has very limited options for dealing with the problem because of their constitutional rights. You can't just remove them. And this homeless population has had a very negative impact on our community and have presented a safety problem for our citizens. And I'll give you a really good example. This comes from my experience at the convention center. Last year, I walked out the doors of the convention center on Wenatchee Avenue with a client and another coworker, and we were walking to First Street, took a left on First Street, and we're walking past the bushes there by the fountain, and I had 4 homeless guys sitting there threatening me because I was invading their home. Now, I'm on the sidewalk, and this is typical. This does happen. Also, I've seen people out there bathing in the nude in the plaza fountain and doing other obscene things that we don't want done in public. This has a very negative impact on our community and has presented us a multitude of safety problems for our citizens. Martin versus Boise and the Homestead Act have tied the hands of police, and the demands on our police department are huge. They just really don't have an effective tool to deal with it. The low barrier shelter would give them that tool. And as Sandra said, Confluence is experiencing a deficit of about $1 million per year due to the continuous usage of their emergency room services. Most of these people are suffering from health conditions, mental health, and drug and alcohol addiction. And local businesses as well are incurring a lot of costs to their property. Providing a low barrier shelter with wraparound services will allow us to work with these people to get them off the streets, provide treatment for their mental illness and drug and alcohol addictions, and move them into transitional housing. So this is the tough part, folks. We're asking you to move forward and allow staff to create an ordinance to do a public hearing so that we can do something about this problem. It's huge. It's not going to go away. It's not going to stop. We need to deal with it, and that we are not going to get any help from outside sources. With that, we'll open it up for questions.
So I guess I'll sort of go first, just because I think, the sleep center that we saw in Moses Lake, understand is nights only. They check in between 6 and 8 o'clock at night. They're given something to eat. You give them a place to sleep. Wraparound services are available. They actually have a garbage can where they can put their belongings in, a regular waste management garbage can, and they can seal it up so their belongings can stay sort of dry and know whose belongs to whose. But in the morning, they're out at 8 a.m. with their breakfast. And so during the day, they are free about the city of Moses Lake, like you would see folks free about the city of Wenatchee. So some of the things that, Linda mentioned, those could go on again because they're sort of free to meander during the day wherever they end up going, whether they're panhandling in front of Walmart or wherever they choose to go. But in the evenings, that would be a place where they could go and sleep and again, have wraparound services. And I think Moses Lake has had some success at getting those folks into a more permanent housing situation, as Sandra mentioned. So they're starting to have some success with that. But it's and it does give Chief some tools. We can ban camping in the park, but during the day, they all have the rights to go use the park just like you and I do. Just can't pitch a tent. And at night, if they pitch a tent, Chief and his officers can go ask them to go to the shelter. So it doesn't fix all of the problems, right? But it just gives us another tool to be able to get out and do some of those things. But understand they're not there during the day and.
Right.
May
Yeah,
I add just one thing before we move on? This 1590 allows us to increase our sales tax 0.1%, which is 10 cents on every $100 you spend. It's going to generate a lot of revenue so that we can support this and build this project.
But it's also $10,000 to $14,000 per 84, 85 person.
Yeah.
What I was going to say is, yes, they'll be back at the parks. And we may have limitations on camping and whatnot.
Mhm.
We have laws that aren't predicated on residential status.
Right.
You can't defecate and urinate in a park. You can't vandalize businesses.
Or park, or.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
This is the problem for police, though. They have to catch them in the act.
Yep.
If they're doing something illegal, they have to catch them in the act. And so many times it's after the fact before they even know.
I get, and I'm way ahead of myself.
Yes.
But in the end, I'm asking, what's the metric for success? What and how are we going to know that this has been successful? And if it's not, do we end it? Do we modify it? Do we admit that it was wrong? Do we celebrate that it was right? Somewhere in here, I need to have a metric for success. Not we're just going to do it. I need to know that we are going to actually reduce the problems that we have
And I agree with you 100%.
and proportionately reduce the numbers of chronically homeless and home-free people.
I think you need to look closely at the phase 2 components too, though, to really get to success. I think we can help our parks, we can help the impacts at night, but the other components, the wraparound services are key. Are we going to ever end homelessness completely in our value? No, I don't think that's realistic. I think we can have a significant impact on the impacts to our community, just as we care about, bringing these people out of the point of their crisis. Our community's hurting. Our businesses, our people who want to enjoy our parks, our downtown, are being significantly impacted. And so, for example, doing a day use shelter. What if I haven't talked to Lighthouse. I'm just brainstorming, right? We take Lighthouse. They have a second floor that is totally acceptable under the building code. It's been updated. You could provide them funding for a day use center. The folks are already there for food. You could then do wraparound services in that building, give them a place to go instead of downtown. It gives them a place to use a restroom during the day too. So will that take care of all the folks who are in downtown or in our community? No, but it provides them an option. It provides the police an option to say, got some behavior issues here. Have you thought about going to a low barrier shelter? You know how to get, it gives another alternative. Is it perfect? No, but it's an option that we don't have now. Providing more, the funds can build up to do, we have 20 more units coming online through Women's Resource for permanent supportive housing, or there's people who are in St. Jude's who the chief mentioned are problematic. Well, those permanent supportive housing units help manage the behaviors and lifelong issues that folks have that won't necessarily go away. The ability to build these funds up to build additional units to continue to decrease the number of folks who are chronically homeless and are out in that population is really beneficial. And who knows, we don't know long-term if those chronically homeless numbers will continue to rise. If they do, all the more reason for these funds to be available to continue to build housing that can we want massive amounts of permanent supportive housing, no. But we want to be able to solve the solution, have a solution. And so if we need more housing, these funds can provide for partnerships with Women's Resource Center, with grants, to build more housing as those needs occur. So it gives us options and opportunities that we don't have now. It can provide more money for rapid rehousing vouchers. For example, in the RVs, it frees up other funds that we can use for that. So it gives us solutions that we have now. I think we can find quantifiable impacts, benefits that we don't have now. Will it get rid of the problem completely? No. But I think performance metrics are really important going into this. And another thing I think we should do, and I'll be quiet, I'm sorry, is we should do a point-in-time count in the summer before we buy shelter. What that does, and the chief has brought this up, and it's a very valid point, the counts we do for homelessness are done in the wintertime. We can do a count before shelters are purchased. We can require nonprofits to help us do that so we can get a gut check on the number of units we purchase before we do.
And while I have a lot of questions and things to work out myself, I'm really wrapped around one big one, and it was the initial presentation and then mentioned a couple of times in there.
And the what?
It mentioned a couple of times in your presentations. And that is, if the chronically homeless, chronic homelessness, not home freeness, but homelessness, is a large contributor is behavioral health issues and substance abuse choices. And we talked about the wraparound services. First we house them and then the wraparound services. I struggle with that because I can't see them one first. I don't think you solve the problem with housing without the wraparound services immediately available. Okay, so it's not a phase one, phase two in my mind. It's here's our integrated project. And that actually leads me to discussions that we've had before. We're not cities, we're not the regional governments responsible for behavior health services and substance abuse. That's the counties. And I guess we can do this, but if we don't have, if there's not a good foundation for those wraparound services, and this is not it financially, sorry, it's not it. What, so I guess what I'm saying is, where's the ask to the counties for the 1%, 0.1% sales tax for mental health and substance abuse issues to dovetail with this? This alone is not going to do it.
Yeah, so I've talked with county commissioners from both counties, and they are not interested in doing this councilmatically. They have talked about sometime in the future, maybe an advisory vote, which, but they do not have the inclination to do this on their own.
They're just
And
not
so-
interested.
Yeah, it just seems that
Yeah.
while we have new tools in the toolbox isn't filled
Right.
with just this alone.
Which really gets to my point I made. I have a hard time doing this by ourselves. I think we need another governmental entity to do this, to show that we're working at this together. Most likely the city of East Wenatchee, quite frankly, who I think probably has an inclination to join us here, or Douglas County or Shoreline County, but someone else to say, we see the problem and we're willing to help you. Because it's not, we have folks here that are from Leavenworth and Chelan and other places, and we know that they congregate here for the fact that there are services and Confluence Health is here. And so we are the regional hub for this problem, and the regional hub needs to help us pay to do the sorts of things that staff's talking about. And for us to go this alone, I think it doesn't, I've been telling the county commissioners ever since this passed that they both need to do it. I've said it to them in the homeless steering committee meetings. Just both do the 1/10, and let's get the money together and start working on really both sets of problems: low barrier shelter, more money for mental health. I've heard them talk a little bit about mental health, but a year or two down the road, maybe doing the 1/10 to help with that part of the. But Mark, you're right. It's a very convoluted sort of.
Yeah, I just want to
discussion.
make sure that the opportunity for success is broadly laid.
Yes.
apparently we were able to figure out how to do a household hazardous waste facility, at least on this side of the river.
Yeah.
Apparently there's still having issues with.
So what we've learned is.
Getting
if you-
closer. With our friends.
closer.
Yeah.
So like, if you think about the numbers they just showed you, we're roughly a $10 million city for sales tax. So 1/10 will get us somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million. East Wenatchee's between $4.5 and $5 million. But the two counties, when you add them all up, look at the Rivercom model, that'd be $3.5 million. That
Yeah.
would be a significantly amount more if the two counties, if Shoreline and Douglas County would do it. That, Rivercom's sales tax number is about $3.5 million. So we're sort of, again, I don't get a vote on this, but if I was one who was looking at it, I think I would have to have another governmental entity saying, yes, we're willing to join the city and help them and look at this programmatically together. I think our best bet, quite frankly, is the city of East Wenatchee. I've talked with Jerry Lee. She's aware of the discussion we're having tonight. I don't think her council would be shocked by us saying, hey, are you going to join us in this? I think those conversations are taking place. But if I was to be a yes vote, I don't get to vote, it would be contingent upon another governmental entity joining this cause.
The East Wenatchee Council will be hearing this on February 25th.
Okay. In sort of a work session format, sort of?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do agree with this, and I want to go forward for it. The reason is, as a business owner, if we have the low barrier shelters in my wife's business, because this has been happening a long time, and then probably the chief knows already, that's why I put a lot of my back alley, I covered up the doors. They leave their filthy garbage, needles, and they sleep in front of their businesses. I mean, I'm just worried, because this is just the beginning. If we do this at the beginning, then we can see. And I agree with you, Mark, what you say, but if we start now, we can learn from the mistakes. We can see if there's any mistakes, and we can move forward from that and learn from that. I understand we cannot do this alone, because it's all on this together. It's not just Wenatchee or East Wenatchee. We have other towns coming in, and I can say it because there's a transit company that brings them along back and forth, and they like to sleep in there all the time. I for sure don't want to see them anymore on our business, and not just to be selfish, in anybody's business. I think if we start this, the sooner the better, that would be great. That way my wife can stop calling the police almost every other night, right, Chief?
Well, I think to Mark's point, I agree with you. I agree with Mark that there definitely needs to be some very clearly defined metrics so that we can see what the success of it is. I do have some questions. You mentioned we have about 85 chronically homeless people, and to satisfy the Martin versus Boise mandate, we would have to provide 40 beds? Or what?
All of them would need to be able to be housed. So you've got a new 20-unit facility that could take that down to 65. And then you have about 20-bed capacity at Gospel House that isn't being filled, that could be filled, because we can make them go to these locations.
So the answer to my question is we have to have a bed for every single one of them,
That's-
one way, shape, or form or another.
I don't
And-
read it that way. There has to be vacancy. So if I'm going to contact an individual, and it does boil down to literally in that point in time,
Right.
if I make a phone call to the sleep center and I ask them, do you have vacancies? That's my green light, that I can actually tell that individual, I have a place for you and it's down here. I'll even give you a ride. That's the difference between the two, that if, nope, there is no room at the inn, that
Then we have a
ties my
problem.
hands in that point in time.
I think capacity is really important, though.
And not all of them will sleep with the sleep center. Some will
Well,
still
especially
sleep
during
on,
the summer.
on people's private property that won't trespass them off, or places where we can't find them. But
But
so
to
it
his point, if we have a vacancy.
yes. So those public places, if we adopt appropriate ordinances, right, in those public spaces at night, we can take them off of Locomotive Park and take them to the shelter. We can take them out of Centennial Park. out of public right-of-way, right? Or we can trespass them off if a property owner says, there's somebody on my property, would you ask them to leave? At nighttime, we can go get them and take them over to the, so that gives us the
And if
tool at
they
night.
refuse to go to the sleep center, again, he's got a green light to
Yep,
do things, so.
You would take them to jail.
If they violated the law.
Yeah.
I mean,
Gotta violate
you've
the
got
law.
to take into those
Yeah.
considerations
violate
every
the law.
single time.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, it's, with the sympathetic court system that we have here, you're going to run into a lot of those those cases where it has been a clear violation of the law, where, yep, you may have that point in time for 24 hours that you end up citing somebody, booking them into jail. But to actually have a fine levied or any sort of penalty, that's becoming questionable in this current environment. We struggle with it a lot. I told you guys right from the get-go, I am not a person that wants to use law enforcement as a tool for this. But I will tell you, the citizens of Wenatchee expect the police department, with their mission-driven approach to dealing with a host of things, expect that out of the police. Is what are you going to do about it? And that's why I say that this is a small piece in a holistic approach to this. One of them being, I need one of my officers with somebody right next to them that has the wherewithal, the knowledge of every resource that's out there that can help assist, get somebody headed in the right direction rather than using the leverage of the law, because that doesn't serve anybody. But having that sleep center helps us do the humanitarian thing of getting somebody to a place where they'll actually try and get some sleep. When they wake up in the next morning, that's where those wraparound services need to be ready to go and be aggressive about it. In our valley, we have way too many service providers that are expecting people to walk through the door or pick up the phone. You cannot approach homelessness in that fashion. It's a loser every day of the week.
What we can do under phase one is require by our contract, which we're going into in June, we can require existing providers to be there in the morning for outreach and coordinated entry. And we can do that under existing dollars. Under phase two, we can get more creative. Maybe Lighthouse is willing for us to locate a day use center, and we have Link, which has said they would help us send a bus directly to Lighthouse. And then they go in, they get breakfast, and then that second floor is available, and we have full-time people there with wraparound services. I mean, so those are the types of things under phase two you could look at doing to, I think, be even more effective.
So I really appreciate Chief's approach to how we look at this homeless situation. As Frank and everyone has mentioned, this is not going to solve all the problems. So we cannot sell this to the public as it's going to solve all the problems. It's not going to solve environmental issues, trash issues, park issues, police being called, hospital reduction in their over expenses for mental health, but it gets them moving in the right direction. And I feel that is the approach if we move forward with this. We cannot do it alone. I won't support it if we do it alone. I will support it if we can get someone else to help us make it happen. But it has to be the approach of moving them in the right direction.
I'll tell, just to add on to that, I will tell you the concept of day problem. We literally had some of our own Parks Department folks have an individual come after them with a knife. One of the anchor points for people staying at local park is the fact that under current state, that's where they keep their stuff. And they'll keep coming back to that centralized location knowing that their stuff is there. Under this model, if you can get them there, like the mayor was talking about, there's some of those big dumpster type containers that actually have a lock on it. The individual that is brought to the location gets to put their stuff in there, and they get to lock it. And what's going on at Moses Lake is they have a list of people that they've already served. They decided that they were going to stay there one night. And they check that list again, and they see what happened to Joe. How come he's not here? His stuff is over here in the container. That keeps them coming back to a centralized location and keeps them off the street at night, and they don't necessarily scuttle their stuff into a bush or some other place and come back to it repeatedly. I think the next step, though, is definitely important. Finding a location where it's a day use, and again, those wraparound services are hitting those places as well, because that's where they're coming in, and it's a low barrier, right? That means they're high. They're probably on substances when they show up at that door. By the time it becomes 11 o'clock in the morning, they may not be high anymore, and they may be more receptive to some of those services. I know this is a lot of thinking forward and not necessarily having proof or a metric that really satisfies everybody's concern, but it is a step forward, and we can't stop stepping. There's got to be some other stuff. As I've said a million times, it is not illegal to be homeless in Wenatchee, but it should be unacceptable. And what it does, what one of these shelters does for us is make it a little bit less comfortable to get themselves into a chronic state where they're going to be there forever. And no, we're not going to get 100%. We're not even going to get 50%. But if we get 20%, that's a move in the right direction.
So follow-up question on the 85. What time of year was that count taken?
In January. And
So that number really is probably low.
Yeah, that's the one.
Because it's cold
Yeah.
here.
Yep.
In January is probably when we have the lowest amount of population. So to Glenn's point, we really need a good count in the summer. And I think we're going to find that that number is going to triple.
And the nice
So-
thing about, if you look at the Moses Lake model, they did that on just about a couple of acres. And I think those sheds were $3,000 a shed, maybe they're $4,000 a shed all done. They have the ability to shoot them closer together and add another 10 or 15. And so I think this first shot at, if we do 40, should be in a spot where eventually that same spot can maybe do 60. It's nice to have the spacing
Or
that keeps them
80
sort of,
or-
and it's lighted, and you don't want them to go behind the building much. And so there's some real logistic things about doing it, but I think you try to do it in a way that allows the expansion if we get to the point where that becomes an issue.
I just want to be realistic with what we're looking at, and to your point, enough land to
Yep.
have some definite expansion.
Well, and I guess I would throw out there, typically concentrations of LULUs, locally unwanted land uses, pose problems. And we keep using the term location.
Right.
And I realize there's some economies of scale about a singular location,
Yeah.
but that might not,
Yep.
we might not find a singular
True.
location.
Yep.
We may need one on each side of the river, for example,
Yep.
to accommodate the populations that
Yeah.
traverse the river.
You know, obviously, there's some advantages of a single location just because of staff and the shower facilities and the restroom, but to your point, we're running out of land here.
It also has some drawbacks too, concentrations of.
Yep, yep.
And one of the things I sort of would anticipate, although, again, it takes a while, the Moses Lake model, the land was rented. They agreed to, I think, hook up the sewer, and they put in some gravel and, did some stuff to the property owner. I think the land was either cheap or nothing. And I think it's a 2-year deal. And they'll go look for another place because you can move those things. They're not easy to move, but they all can be moved to a different location. And so the permanency of that location in Moses Lake, that's not a very permanent location. That's a 2 to 3 year program. I think the location actually works pretty well based on what I saw when I was there. So this isn't like we're building foundations and I mean, these things, although expensive to move, I think can be moved. And to Mark's point, Again, maybe it's some on this side, some on that side, maybe it's here for a while and the whole thing goes over there maybe it jumps around a little bit, but I think this isn't a permanent stick-built location. And if you decided to rent, instead of spending $500,000 or $600,000 to buy dirt, you could just rent it for 3 or 4 years. Some of these places are, and so there might be another way to accommodate it where it's not necessarily permanently in a location that we may say first choose as the place to go. I have a question for Steve. So, and you may not know this, and I can't remember when we did the Town Toyota Center stuff. How long till the sales tax can be starting to be collected? For like a 70-day time frame to tell the state you've done something, and then,
Check with Brad on that if you like.
yeah,
Brad said that, so the first time that we'd be able to have access to funds would be September. And that would be for July's fund, the money accrued in July, and then in October would be the money accrued in August.
but if we do July 1st, that means I think you've got a 60-day notice to the state,
So he was thinking if we adopted in
end of March,
April or so, that, then that'd give us,
enough time. Okay, got it. So he thinks you'd start collecting it in July, and we'd see it 2 months later.
we'd see it in September.
Okay. All right, thank you. Good answer, Steve.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add. Thank you, Brad.
We figured it out without you, yeah.
Good job, Steve. Good job.
He knows his role really well here. Yeah, Jim, go ahead.
I've got a few questions here, actually more than a few, but I won't take a lot of time here with these. I guess, first of all, I just want to say that, the response from Chelan and Douglas County is more than disappointing. Not unexpected, but disappointing nonetheless. And that's, I mean, it's back to the same kind of issue, I think, in the conversation we had when we were talking about doing the $20 car tab. It made sense to do that on a countywide basis, but, we ended up taxing our citizens to, so that people in Chelan County could drive on them. So I do have that sort of problem with the equity of that. That's probably not going to change. So if we have to do it, we have to do it. Which brings me around to the question on numbers, and help me here, Sandra. I think probably you have the best grasp on all of this. So the numbers are that there's like three, and this is the December count. This was like January 27th or something like that of this year, correct?
Yeah, we don't have the official numbers for this.
Oh, on the last one.
Yeah.
So this number is 2020,
2020.
January 2020. All right. And I agree. We need to count it where we have a better count. Counting them in the middle of the winter is, they're all gone to Florida. But taking the numbers that we have, so we have 350, and we have these 84, 85 that are the chronic. That's a total county number, correct? Or is that just a local number? Because we're talking, is this number, this 350 number, and this 84 number, does that include Leavenworth and Chelan and?
It does. It's all of Chelan and Douglas.
All of Chelan and Douglas County. Okay, so I guess the question, and that, to me, that it makes a difference. So what, and putting you on the spot, but what would be a ballpark percentage of those are local?
Well, and we do have those stats, so I'm going from memory here, so I may be off a little bit, but the majority of the people that we serve, and so these are people that have actually come through coordinated entry, and we track, but probably about 80 to 85% are Wenatchee, East Wenatchee.
Okay.
Yeah, and we can confirm that for you. And then, there's a smaller percentage from the outlying cities, and then there tends to be a very small amount that are from outside the two counties.
Okay.
That's a couple
Which was
percentage.
going to be another question, which is, and before I ask that question, Chief, you used the term here, you would ask them, are we in a situation where we are just asking, or can we make? the person, we've got somebody here that set up a tent in the park and you come in and say, would you like to go to the shelter? And he says, no.
He's going to the shelter.
Can you literally have him physically picked up and put in the backseat of your patrol?
In the future state or currently?
In the future state, when we have the shelter.
Yeah. So there's already, if you're talking about a park, there's already city ordinance that talks about camping in a park. If it's full-on daytime, you have a much difficult time to make any sort of case on that.
Yeah.
But obviously, if it's night, if it's, got the logs set up and cooking marshmallows, definitely you've got a situation in a park.
Okay.
As long as there is room.
There's a vacancy.
And you have the ability to get them there.
Okay.
And that's not only the park, but it's any public right-of-way.
Right.
So you could think of a sidewalk, you could think of in front of the convention center, you could think of any public parking lot, right? Anything that's public right-of-way, that gives us the authority to send them off to the low barrier shelter.
So to me, the difference in those two words, asking and making, are really two different things here. So if it allows us to have some real teeth in this thing, then that would be something I would be very much hoping to see.
And obviously, in any of those situations, it is absolutely, even in a future state where you do have a shelter, it's preferable to get voluntary compliance, and our folks are going to work that direction. But if it push came to shove and you literally have a situation that's going to continue to get worse, and the individual has had prior warnings, that kind of ratchets up to any sort of officer discretion that, no, we're just having somebody that simply is going to scoff at the law. Obviously, we're going to take it to the next step if we need to.
Okay, good. Okay, and so I guess you sort of answered this, Sandra, with the not being very many people. Again, it's back to we're paying the bills. If we do this councilmatically, but if we're paying the bills, there would be people transported from Cheyenne or from Leavenworth to our shelter.
Yeah, potentially.
I don't think that's likely, but I just, we're providing the service, but they're not paying, the others are not paying their share here.
Yeah, like I said, it is a small percentage. The other thing is some of the outlying areas like Leavenworth and Chelan, they have emergency hotel voucher programs that can in a small number can fill the gap. So a lot of times they don't necessarily have to send people down because they can serve 3 or 4 people a night in a hotel.
Okay, yeah, and I realize that, their numbers are not anywhere what ours would be. Okay. In your presentation or in your white paper, and the mayor mentioned about the Moses Lake model where, they're providing, something to eat, I guess dinner and breakfast kind of thing. But your model doesn't, the numbers in there don't include that. At least I didn't see a reference to the meals. Is that something that you're thinking about doing, or is that not on the table to do?
For the approach that we were recommending from 7 o'clock to 7 in the morning, our thought was that we could tie people into existing services. So Glenn mentioned the Lighthouse Ministries. So if we could have connections where people could have dinner there, that's already established at, I think it's 4:30 or 5, and then be transported.
Okay.
So that would preclude having to have a kitchen and that kind of thing.
Sure, yeah.
And there's some other nonprofits that can help provide. I mean, sometimes it's a peanut butter sandwich and an apple and a Nutrigrain bar and a bottle of water, right?
Yeah.
So
I think a lot of times, like Moses Lake, they're saying a light snack, which is just as the mayor was saying,
Yeah.
A water bottle and maybe an energy bar or something.
Okay. Yeah, I'm all for not duplicating services. Is there in your model that you're looking at here, is there a time limit or a number of nights that any individual can if they take up, are there every night for 6 months, is that
Yeah.
allowable, or do they at some point wear out their welcome, I guess?
Yeah, most programs, because they're low barrier, they don't tend to have strict limits that you can stay a week or a month. But I think that's where the wraparound services come in, is just really tying people in. But it's definitely not intended to be permanent housing.
Mhm.
And, like Glenn mentioned earlier too, they're not heated. So chances are people wouldn't necessarily want to stay long-term.
Mhm.
It's temporary, it's designed to be temporary.
Yeah.
And I think, and I don't know, I didn't ask this question when I was in Moses Lake, we saw a couple of the units, and they were exactly what you saw, and there was a cot. There
Yeah,
was no bedding, there was no pillow, right? So I think the sleeping bag they had on their back was their bed and their pillow. And I'm guessing in the morning when they got up, they were required to put the sleeping bag and pillow back in their little container. But I don't,
they do provide sleeping bags for them if they don't have.
They don't have one, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it wasn't like all of a sudden there was flowers, on the front porch and someone had a chair and, a reading
picture we saw
lamp. And, yeah, it wasn't like they were making it, I think, their spot, yeah.
Our risk management board that I'm on for the AWC is, we were taking a look at a agency, King County, Seattle Homeless Authority, whatever, to provide their property liability thing. They had a picture of one of the little houses like you had.
Yeah.
Had the nicely less dressed lady standing on the porch, and she had a basket of flowers hanging. And I told them, at the meeting, I said, at least the folks that I see around town, I don't think they're going to be putting flowers on the front porch here.
Yeah, and as much as the humanity part of you wants to provide heat to those sheds, everyone has said, don't do it. They will mess with the wiring systems. We see them do that around town here. They'll rip out the copper wiring to sell it for something. It is better to just not provide power to those sheds.
Agreed.
Last question, and then I'm done. Obviously, there's quite a number of companies that are moving into the market to provide these kinds of things. I've done not a lot, but some reading and looking at, and there's been some controversies over some of the the price tag that goes with some of these. The ones at Moses Lake, what were they paying a copy?
They purchased kits, like shed kits, and I
Yeah.
think they were about $2,500 for just the kit.
Hmm.
And then they were estimating, they use volunteer labor, but they were estimating, the equivalent of about $2,500 for labor.
Because the sheds that got built, and they had two, and then they came in and volunteers insulated it and then put up, what's it called, Wonderboard or Power, whatever chipboard. So they didn't come that way. They came in and insulated them and put the chipboard up, and that made the temperature quite a bit better.
The one thing for the summer though is there's no airflow in those.
Right.
So they're going to end up being like a
Oven.
torture box.
Yeah, an oven.
In the summer?
In the summer, yeah.
We, certainly you could do wood ones, but I think for humanity's sake, you want to have airflow if you build them.
Yeah.
And making them set up, if you build them out of wood, really just, again, hitting this capacity thing, making them set up so you can put 2 cots in there is really important. It's ideal to do one, but we want to, if we do this, recommendations, we make sure that we can address Boise and we have capacity long-term to meet our needs.
Mhm.
But how does that make it COVID compliant?
Well, I don't.
I mean,
think
if you're sleeping in the same room as somebody, even if you're 10 feet apart, that's still not going to be COVID compliant.
It doesn't. And in reality, our ability, it's going to take a while to get these in place. And then there'll be a phased transition if we go forward to get them going. And hopefully by that time, we move out of COVID, certainly hopefully next year. But so, long term, heaven forbid we're not in a perpetual COVID state. it wouldn't be as much of an issue.
Yeah. And as far as ventilation in those, I mean, it's pretty easy to put a removable section with screening
Yeah.
and put a vent on the roof that's closable during the winter and openable during the summer and
Correct. And that's
leave your door open with a screen.
whether it's wood or the nice.
Yeah, we got a lot of time to sort of figure out the mechanics of what works here. I think the bigger issue is this something that we're sort of interested in doing? And I think tonight's question, quite frankly, is, are you interested in spending some of Steve Smith time and staff time getting an ordinance drafted? Doesn't mean you're voting yes or voting no. It just, does it make sense for us to get an ordinance drafted so that we come to a meeting, probably the second meeting in March, and have a public hearing and a vote?
I think it's a great idea to move forward and have a public hearing, and I think we really need to get the public's engagement as much as possible with this.
I agree.
I guess the one thing that's still out there in this is that how much time do we spend if we're not going to have another governmental partner? I mean, if we figure out that it's not going to succeed
Right.
by us alone.
So I think my view of the world is you draft an ordinance that says that we adopt a 0.1% sales tax contingent upon another governmental entity in the two-county area, and I'd name them, City of East Wenatchee, Douglas County, or Chelan County, adopting the same 1590 fund. And then that's when it becomes effective.
Yeah,
I think you just
that was my thought.
I think you just make it that simple.
That was my thought.
Yeah.
Well, and more just the counties. I think all the cities in our region,
Well,
because it is a regional problem.
It is, but I think for purposes of when do we say we're prepared to adopt, I'm not waiting for
Yeah.
Entiat, I'm not waiting for Chelan. I want one of I call them the three biggies, or the four biggies. I want East Wenatchee in, I
Gotcha.
want Chelan County in, or I want Douglas County in, right? And once that happens, then we're in and we're pooling resources and we're working on the problem together. So I would literally have the ordinance drafted just like that.
I agree.
And then that just makes it so
Yeah.
we're here and we're looking for a partner.
And on the
Yeah.
25th, we should know whether East Wenatchee intends to hold a public hearing as well.
Probably tell them our sentiment is
No, or
Or.
any one of the three.
any one of those.
Yeah.
Or if the two counties adopt the 1% for behavioral health and substance abuse, I'd be willing to
Yeah.
step out.
So,
I think we've been given a lot of good information, and there's good comments. I have to say, I think one of my biggest takeaways, though, is Chief Crown saying that the agencies, these NGOs, need to step their game up and be more assertive in their approach. I think there's the potential of this being too much of a growth industry, and I think providing those more assertive contacts is absolutely critical. So anyway, that's.
One of the things that's
100% agree.
that's frustrating to the chief, and I saw this, we had one of our gentlemen that, again, was blocking the sidewalk with all of his stuff. And we took all the appropriate pictures. We arrested him, prosecuted him, judge threw it out. Where's the picture of someone walking and having to avoid it all? And they just could have walked over there and that was totally safe. So the fact that this guy was blocking the sidewalk completely and absolutely against our code, judge threw it out. So they have levels of frustrations because they're going, this is clearly a violation. And you got judges just not doing that.
They don't see it that way.
No,
Well,
No, they
I'm
don't.
just telling you, so there's.
I know, when we go on
And
camera, I can tell you
lot
how
of
we
built
hear
up-
that.
So as we engage the public, those are things that the public needs to be aware of, because to Jose's point, I'm calling the police and asking them to do something about this, and nobody's doing anything, and the police's hands are tied, and why?
Yeah.
We need
I-
that information to come out publicly.
You're absolutely right. I hear this all the time from local businesses. I get a lot of it because I'm downtown and they know where I'm at, but I'm hearing all the time how they are so frustrated with the homeless and our police won't do anything. Well, my first response is the police cannot legally do anything. Their hands are really tied, and we aren't giving them the support they need to do something about it. So that was the intention of this
And
work.
it's not the best
And
use of
you
our
know
police
what,
force.
just before we do anything else, I just want to say thank you to Glenn and Sandra and Chief Crown and Laura Merrill. these people have worked so hard on this, and this has been months of work that we've put into this.
You're not
probably
done yet.
years.
We haven't voted yet. We're just
I
getting the
know,
ordinance drafted.
I know.
All
Don't
right.
worry. I'm not taking
Yeah,
no for
if
an
it-
answer. But they really, you are very lucky in this city. You have tremendous
No.
staff, and they've done an outstanding job.
They do a great job.
Thank you, it's appreciated.
All right, so, Mr. Smith, you got your marching orders? Thank you.
I wanted to say to you, I think not only is this good, but it's another element, but I think this helps us with the courts. Because we can show this integrated plan that deals not only with the criminal aspect, but we're also working on the housing aspect. And the criminal part has to be an element of it, but we can't have that as an incentive to get them to comply with housing. I think it helps.
Sure. And I'll follow up with Jerry in the next couple of days, let her know that we're moving towards an ordinance and see where that goes. All right, I have one quick thing before we go. So we did get a notice from the U.S. Department of Transportation that Infra 4 is out, and so applications due March 19th. So fairly quick turnaround. We met as staff today, and we're sort of just kind of kicking tires around whether we ask for the full meal deal or something a little bit less than that. But needless to say, the next 4 weeks, we're going to try to figure out what our application looks like back to DC for infra. So,
Well, if it's something different, then the shade of lipstick is better, so to speak.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I gotta be careful because it's a NOFO, right? Notice of funding opportunity, and I mispronounced that a few times, so. All right, well, we're adjourned, and we'll see you next Thursday in the regular meeting. Thanks, everybody. Thank you,
Thanks,
Sandra.
guys.
for